What's going on, everyone? Finally winter here, as you can see probably from my breath in the video. It's a little chilly out. We're getting sleds ready to race, and what we're going to be doing today is swapping out the track on my 2025 Skidoo. We're going to be switching over from the Ripsaw 2 that is on it into the Camso Cobra track. Really just looking for some different performance benefits off the Cobra track versus the Ripsaw, and getting it set up for ice racing. This will be primarily set up for ice racing most of the winter. So yeah, follow along as we start to go through and do a track swap on a Skidoo Gen 5. So it is a little bit different than the past Skidoos, where essentially we do not have to take apart the chain case in order to pull out that drive axle. So we'll really just be taking out the brake and then taking the track out through that way, and hopefully it'll be a lot quicker process versus what we've had to do in the past on the Skidoos. So follow along as I get through it. So to kick this off, we're going to just take the side panel off so we have access to the brake rotor, and we'll be taking that off later on. But really the first step after we take the side panel off here is just going to be removing the skid. So what I've found to be easiest with removing the skid is going to be taking the 2 skid mount bolts off on one side, tip the snowmobile over, and then essentially we will remove the other 2 bolts here and here, and then basically just swing the track out with the skid and it'll pop out. So that's next here. Now that we have access to the brake, we'll be taking the brake rotor off while it's up on its side. So next step here, we'll start taking the skid out. So we'll be removing the skid mounting bolts. So it is a 16 mil on the outside, and there's a nut on the back that'll be a 17 mil. For the front mounting bolts on the back side, it'll be a 16 mil bolt, but you'll need a 22 millimeter wrench that you'll have to either shave down, or they do sell some tools. I think Grip and Rip Racing does have one where it is a 22 mil where we can slide this in between the tunnel and it'll hold the mounting point for the skid. So we're just hold the 17 mil wrench back here, taking an impact, just loosening this up. Go ahead, the bolt should just come through. You have a couple washers here. I always take what I want and I always give it 100. Don't need a bank, no, I'm funded. Play the game like it's nothing. I'm always thankful. Then on the back. Don't take for granted, stay humble. Now wake up. It's time to look at the enemy. Look in the mirror. You'll take your 22 mil wrench, and that'll hold it there. Loosen this up. There's Loctite in there that's holding it. So here we'll just heat it up on the back side just to break that Loctite. It's the chemistry, it's time to break up so I can make a better me. Better believe in your mind, cause it's everything. You can mold, shape, find almost anything. All it takes is some time and some clarity to find. So now that we have both the skid mounts bolts out on this side, we're going to go ahead, loosen the rear idler wheels, and then we're going to loosen the track just to give us a little bit more wiggle room when we want to pull this skid out. So again, 16 mil here. We're just going to loosen that up. We don't have to take this wheel all the way out. We're going to go loosen them up on both sides. And loosening those rear idler wheels will really just give some less tension for loosening up the track. So here we're going to use a 10 mil, and just on this adjustment bolt, we're just going to loosen it up to pull this rear axle forward, which will give us more tension on the track. So I'm just going to put it on and loosen it up here. So here we can see we have a lot more slack in the track. We're going to go ahead and loosen up both sides just so we have as much room as we can to pull the skid out. So now we can see quite a bit of play within the track here. So we have a good amount of room to pull this skid out. Next, now that we have the bolts out on one side. We're going to then tip the snowmobile up on its side, and then we'll take out the other two mounting bolts, and then the skid will be free so we can swing it out. To keep it up on the side when we have it over, just using a bite hutter support stand. This comes in really handy with just changing out carbides on the fly so you don't have to lift it up, but really comes in handy for changing out the skid. And then I'll just use something like a milk crate on the backside to hold up the tunnel when we have this tipped up. That just makes it easier to have the angle more parallel with the ground when we're pulling that skid out to get the track, just so it's not rubbing against the floor. So just going to go ahead, tip it on its side. So now I'm just going to lift up the rear end, slide this milk crate in. So now you can see on this side, plenty of room to swing to skid out and track, so it's not hitting up against the ground. So that's why I just elevate the rear. If not, then basically you're rubbing this against the ground. So from here, we'll go ahead and remove the other two skid mounting bolts on this side. Again, up front, put that 17 in. Then on the back, holding in between the tunnel and the rear mount with our 22 mil. So now our skid's gonna be completely free, just kind of holding it up with my legs because it is fully out. Now we can just basically take the skid, slide it out. Then we'll just wiggle it out. So here, basically have the front rails pushed in front of the drive cogs and the upper control arm. Basically just push this all the way in. That'll give you more room to take this out. So typically find it easier to pull it out from the back side. So just again, sliding out. Now we have the track or the rear suspension off. Set that to the side. Now that we have the rear suspension out, we're going to focus on taking out the rear brake. So first we got to take the guard off and this rear toe hold. We'll take this off first. Then we'll be taking this cover off, and then we'll be taking the caliper and the rotor off. That'll then free up the drive axle. So we'll start with taking the toe hold off. So we have two 10 millimeters here, and then another 10 millimeter bolt holding up here with the nut and bolt. So we'll be loosening all three of these up to remove this toe hold. So now we have the toe hold off. We'll remove the brake rotor guard. Again, for this, I did drill out a bunch of holes, basically just for increased venting. Just try to keep the brakes cool during racing. Not something you'll typically have on a stock sled. These bottom Torx bolts are going to be a T30. So now our next step is actually going to be taking this caliper mount off. So basically this caliper will mount into this bracket, which is then sandwich the bearing to our drive axle. So there's going to be 4 Torx bolts here, where we're going to have to essentially line up the rotor so we can access those 4 Torx. Those are going to be a T45 Torx, again Loctited, so we are going to heat up underneath on the backside. You will be able to see and expose here on the backside. So essentially right in here, we'll be heating that up just to release that Loctite. Again, we want to line up these bolts so we have access through the rotor. If they're not lined up at this point, you can kind of just fine tune it. Turning the secondary clutch is probably the easiest to get them all aligned. So now we have all 4 bolts out. This is technically loose. The next piece is going to be moving out this bearing retainer. So this is a ring. I'll show you after we get it out. But essentially what we're just going to do is take a screwdriver and a hammer, and we're just going to slide that all the way over so that's touching. Or you can do it by hand if it is loose. So now essentially that's loosened out. We'll be taking the C-clip off. That's basically just keeping the rotor on to the axle. So next we have that C-clip off. So actually what we are going to need a specialty tool for removing this whole piece. So this caliper mount is pressed into the bearing basically off of this drive axle. So what we're now going to use is a tool from C&T Power Sports. Skidoo does make one as well, but the one from C&T is a little bit cheaper. So check out their site just for this tool. But essentially it's just going to slide in, and we're going to be able to press against the drive axle with it. So essentially what we're going to be doing, sliding this in, these little notches are just going to go up against here. So again, we'll have to just kind of turn this around, rotate a little bit to get the tool in. And if you don't have the specific tool, you can use 2 pry bars, essentially just kind of wiggle the rotor mount off of the shaft. Okay, so now I can take this off. Now we'll have the rotor off. You can see we're exposed to the drive axle bearing. So we're going to pull up essentially enough to pull this drive axle out of the chain case mount and then get this loose. So it stopped recording there, but essentially once we get the bottom free, we'll kind of just angle this out, and then we'll just move the bearing out. That'll remove the drive axle, and then the track will be able to pull away. So now, once we have the old track out, we're going to install the new one, just making sure we have the rotation going correctly. So on the top side of this track, basically going to be going towards the engine, so the arrow is going to be put face forward. I'll slide this in. Try to make enough room for that axle to go in. So now everything will basically be going back in reverse to what we just had. So then we'll come through with the bearing. So that'll pop in, but we do need to make sure that the splines are aligned. So we'll give it a little bit of a rotation to actually get the splines lined up down here. So now once we have that lined up, we'll go ahead and take our bearing retainer and then push our tabs in. They'll only fit one way. And then slide those over so that these holes will line up so we can then mount the caliper mount. Get this loosely on. Again, it's basically going to press against this bearing when we tighten all of the bolts down, but we want to install this with our rotor installed. Just getting all of these splines lined up on the axle to the rotor. So from here now, basically we just want to make sure we're lined up our holes to mount this with our 4 mounting bolts, which we will Loctite back. So just going to start them by hand just so they don't strip out. So now we'll go ahead and start tightening all these 4 down. So again, we are essentially sandwiching this backing plate with the caliper mount, and we're basically sandwiching that against the bearing. So we are basically pressing a bearing down right now. So we will want to tighten these evenly. So going through and applying pressure evenly. So we're not going to fully tighten one. We'll go around and tighten inner pattern. Now once those are tight, we'll go ahead, reinstall our circlip. And then from here, we'll go back through and we're going to reinstall the rotor guard as well as that toe hold. Good to reinstall this all by hand. Get your forearms with a little bit of a workout, getting ready for sled season so you can rip those handlebars. So you will notice on the toe hold, there's actually going to be a shorter or a longer bolt. The longer bolt is going to be the one up top. These are kind of prone to stripping out, so I do like to basically, again, hand tighten or hand start them while everything is loose, just so we can get all the threads started. So we got the new track in, and now we're ready to put the rear suspension in. First step here, making sure we have the bushings installed in the upper control arm. So they are loose, just to make it easier so you don't have them fall out when you are going to reinstall. I'll just pack it full of grease, and then that grease will hold those bushings in place, hopefully, while we're putting this in. So we'll go ahead, lift the skid, and start installing it. now we got the rear suspension in. We're just gonna start pivoting this in just to align our upper control arm with our mounting bolt here.
Searching for greatness in a sea of the dying and shameless, a sea of the aimless. I don't wanna be one of the nameless. I'ma wake up with the mindset that one day I'm gonna make it, and I don't think I'll be fine if I don't break my limitations. Don't try to stop me, I exist to write my own story. I'll make a decision if I want some peace or if I want the glory. Yeah, don't want a life that is complacent or possibly boring. I just want a life that is worth every day exploring. My whole life I just wanted someone who would notice me. My whole life I just wanted to be somebody to be.
So now we got the front bolts in. So on the other side, it helps if you have another person to get on the other side and push the bolt up and just get it aligned. Push the bolt and then start the threads. Right now we haven't fully tightened it. We'll wait to fully tighten it, but have everything finger tight. So now what we're going to do is to get the rear mounted. I find it easiest to tip the sled back so it's upright. And then once we have it upright, we'll go ahead and we can actually use the track tension. You'll find that this isn't lined up when you bring it back down. We'll actually use track tension to align that bolt, just because this is threaded and we will have to make sure it's exactly lined up to get those threads started. So we'll go ahead, basically just kind of want to make sure that the skid is going to fit up in there, and then we'll kind of tip it back over.
Yeah, I just wanna be great. Yeah, I just wanna be great. Yeah, I just wanna be great. Yeah, 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 I just wanna be great. Yeah, I just wanna be.
So now we got it back upright. Helps to also use a jack, I find, just to help line everything up. So from here, now we can see how far off we are, essentially. Where now we'll start to close this gap with our track tension by tightening this up. And then we can also modulate the rear jack just to make sure it's all lined up. Usually you'll have to get the track fairly tight, and then we'll alternate back and forth on both sides. We'll worry about doing the track tension, setting it accurately later on.
This is a statement to appreciate all that is vacant. It's just for the taking. If you make up your mind, you can take it. I'm never complacent. I would work in a mansion or basement. Yeah, there's no replacement for persistence. It's a patience. Yeah, in this life, I wanna be soaring to feel sun inside when it's pouring, and I'll fight till anxiety is boring. I'm so sick of my mind's extortion. My whole life I just.
So it'll basically just be taking, going back and forth on track tension until you get it perfectly aligned, where the bolt should easily just push in, and then we can start to hand tighten it. So then we'll repeat the process on the other side here.
Wanted someone who would notice me. My whole life I just wanted to be somebody to be.
Down a little bit.
Yeah, I just wanna be great. Yeah, I just wanna
Now we got everything finger tight. We're just gonna go ahead and snug everything up.
be great. Yeah, I just wanna be great. Yeah, yeah, I just wanna be great. Yeah, I just wanna be great. Yeah, I just wanna be great. Yeah, yeah.
So now we have everything tightened up from the mounting bolts. Remember, go back, set your track tension, and remember to tighten up the rear idler wheels. That's a new track on a 2025 Skidoo. So ran into a couple different hiccups on this, really, with honestly some fresh Loctite. So make sure you have a blowtorch out to cut those out. Really helpful to have an extra set of hands while you're going through this, just to kind of line up all the bolts and get everything mounted back in. It can be a little tricky to do by yourself. Not impossible, but definitely will take a little bit longer for you. So go grab the wife, go grab your buddy, have someone come out and just kind of help align those bolts up for you to make the process go a lot easier. So yeah, any questions, let me know in the comments below. Remember to like and subscribe. We'll get some more how-to videos coming, and we'll be out on snow and ice shortly here, ripping this thing along, and we'll take you along for the journey. So take care, and we'll see you on the next one.